until I prompt you. We'll have about a few minutes of opening remarks and then we'll have time for Q&A. If you have a question, please type your full name and your outlet into the chat and we'll be happy to go in the order in which we receive your names. Thanks so much, Michael. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for joining the call. Jason Crow, Mike Simpson, and I are going to speak for a few minutes about the bill we're introducing today, the Outdoor Restoration Partnership Act, and we're happy to take your questions. In Colorado, we're coming out of one of the worst wildfire seasons we've ever had as a state, and these fires have come at a terrible cost to Colorado and communities across the Mountain West, not even factoring in indirect costs. As a country, we've spent $67 billion, more than that, over the last 5 years to fight and recover from wildfires. And one reason the wildfire threat continues to grow in Colorado is hotter and drier conditions from climate change and a century of fire suppression. But another less understood reason is Washington's failure to invest in our forests and watersheds. In 2019, federal agencies reported over 100 million acres of federal land that are a high risk of wildfire. And the Colorado Forest Action Plan recently identified 2.4 million acres alone in urgent need of treatment. I've spent a decade working on these issues in the Senate Agriculture Committee, where we wrote 2 farm bills that gave the Forest Service much better tools for forest management. With Congressman Simpson's leadership, we also ended the practice of fire borrowing with the last administration, where we were draining the Forest Service budget on firefighting at the expense of prevention. But that's only stopped the bleeding. Last fall, the Forest Service testified that it would need up to $3 billion annually over the next 10 years to significantly reduce wildfire risk across the West. And experts in Colorado tell me that we'll need to invest up to $60 billion over the next decade to improve forest conditions, reduce wildfire risk, and protect our water supplies. And I realize that $60 billion is a big number, but the cost of inaction is far greater. There is nothing fiscally conservative about paying through our teeth to recover from wildfires and to fight those wildfires rather than investing on the front end. And that's why we wrote the Outdoor Restoration Partnership Act, which would establish a $60 billion restoration fund to restore forests and watersheds, reduce wildfire risk, and improve wildlife habitat. And in our bill, we've emphasized the importance of partnering with Western governors, tribes, landowners, and local governments to get this work done. That's the only way you get anything done in the West. And if we do this right, we think our bill can create or sustain over 2 million good-paying jobs in rural America. It will reduce the burden on state and local governments. It also will bolster our country's $788 billion outdoor recreation and $136 billion agricultural economy. A few years ago, I had a chance to visit Silverthorne, Colorado, to see a fire break the community had completed in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service and Denver Water, just the kind of thing we have in mind with this bill. When the Buffalo Mountain Fire broke out, that mitigation work ended up saving $1 billion worth of homes and infrastructure. In other words, every dollar the community spent on mitigation saved it $1,000 down the road. That's exactly the kind of strategic long-term investment we need to make. So as the discussion in Washington turns to infrastructure, we have to make sure we're not just talking about roads and bridges. We're also talking about the essential natural infrastructure in the West, because people in Washington need to understand that in Colorado and Idaho, across the West, our forests and public lands are as important to our economy as the Lincoln Tunnel or the Brooklyn Bridge is to New York. To put this in perspective, 19 states and part of Mexico are downstream from Colorado's national forests and watersheds, and 80% of Coloradans rely on water that comes from national forest land. That's why I was really pleased to see our bill mentioned in President Biden's jobs plan, but I've been around long enough to know that we're just at the start of this process. And that's why we're going to do everything we can in the weeks ahead to build support and look for a path forward. We're cautiously optimistic about it because from the perspective of Colorado, this is not a partisan idea. It reflects discussions I've had with bipartisan local leaders across our state. That's why this bill has support across the state, from Denver Water to the Colorado River District. All of them understand how important healthy forests and resilient communities are to our economy and to our future. They know these investments not only make fiscal sense, they're our moral responsibility. In Colorado, we think the next generation of Americans deserve forests that are more resilient to climate change and can continue to sustain our water supply and support our vibrant rural economy. We have an obligation to leave America's forests in better shape for our kids and our grandkids. And at the end of the day, that's why we wrote this bill. Now, let me turn it over to my partner, Jason Crow, from Colorado's 6th Congressional District, and Congressman Simpson from Idaho. Thank you both for your leadership.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. Really honored to be here with you and my friend Mike Simpson. I know this is the culmination of years of work and effort over on the Senate side that you put together, and just very honored to be partnering with you on this really important bill. You know, it's long been said that if you want to understand the West, you have to understand fire and water, right? So relates to planning around the fire season, mitigating for fire, but also our watersheds, and making sure that we have healthy, viable watersheds. In the harsh reality is that we're not doing well dealing with either fire or water right now. Our fire seasons are getting longer, they're getting more severe, and they're getting far more damaging. At the same time, as these increased fires actually are expediting the damage to our watersheds, the water that we rely on for drinking, for our agriculture, for ranching, and for so many other purposes in the West is getting worse. So the question is not whether or not we should invest or we are going to pay for this stuff, because as Senator Bennett already said, we're already paying for this to the tune of billions and billions of dollars to rebuild homes, to address fire mitigation, the consequences of firefighting, to try to clean up our watersheds. What this bill is about is, why don't we be proactive? Why don't we make those smart investments and save money by making it on the front end, engaging with local communities, local municipalities, management districts, collaborations to better manage our forests, to better manage our lands and our watersheds, to prevent the damage and the much larger costs on the back end. That's why this is such an important bill, and why I'm so honored to be joining with both of you to push this forward. So this is potentially extremely transformative, as Senator Bennett also mentioned. It could create millions of jobs, while at the same time we're doing the important work of revitalizing our lands in the West. So with that, I will turn it over to my friend Mike Simpson from Idaho.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Senator Bennett and Congressman Crow, for your leadership on this vitally important issue. This bipartisan, bicameral legislation is a unique opportunity for us to invest in some of our nation's greatest resources, our public lands and water. I'm a firm believer that if we do not invest in our forests now, then we will pay the price later, as has been mentioned by both of my co-sponsors on this. We have seen this with increased catastrophic wildfires and the need for increased mitigation efforts. If we ignore these problems, they will only get worse, and this legislation is a way to address these problems across our public lands. I believe that these decisions are best made at a local level. Rural Idaho communities will greatly benefit under this legislation as we give them the tools that they need to be successful. Like most bills, no bill is perfect, and I expect it will take some changes to get this across the finish line. But I like the direction that this legislation is going. The details will be worked out as it goes through the process, and I look forward to being a part of the conversation as this bill is considered, because it is an important bill looking at the future and how we're going to maintain our public lands, and that's a vitally important thing. So I appreciate the opportunity to partner with Senator Bennett and Representative Crow on this important legislation. And while I'd like to stay around and ask questions, as I told Senator, answer questions, as I told Senator Bennett at the start, I'm in the middle of a hearing with the Secretary of Interior now, and I'd like to bring this up with her. So I'm gonna leave while you answer the questions, and I rejoin the hearing with Secretary of Interior.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
really
Mike.
Appreciate it. Jason, are you going to stick around?
I am, yes.
Great. So Kate, I think we're ready.
Awesome. So the first question we have is from Blair Miller with Denver 7. Blair, if you want to unmute, turn on your video and ask your question. Thank you.
Good morning, guys. from Denver. Just wanted to ask sort of what's the vehicle for this? Is this something you guys are going to try to pass on its own, or is it going to be something part of the infrastructure package? What are you guys thinking right now on that?
Jason, maybe I'll just take a crack and turn it over to you and the next one too. Well, my hope is that it's going to be included in Joe Biden's infrastructure package and that we'll pass that. It is that they did include it by name in the proposal that they've put forward, and so I think that that's the place. That's our first shot to try to get it done.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. First off, Blair, your COVID beard is looking fantastic. So
that's true.
I need to shave bad.
Yeah, I mean the answer is yes, right? I mean, in these days in this environment, you have to be pursuing every possible angle and every avenue of getting it passed. But that is our hope, is that we can keep this as part of the jobs plan.
Great, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Great. Our next question is from Bill Folsom in Colorado Springs with KOAA. Bill, if you want to unmute and turn on your video and ask your question. Thank you.
The video's not working for me for some reason. Can you hear me though?
Yep,
Yeah,
we hear you perfectly.
Okay, I apologize. I had a question about the jobs we're talking about. Are we talking about contracting? Are we talking about something like AmeriCorps, or when we were building infrastructure back with freeways, decades back? Is that what you're thinking for stimulus with jobs? I'm just trying to kind of learn more about that.
Yeah. Jason, do you want to take it, or do you want me to?
Sure. I mean, I'll just make a quick comment. The answer is when you're having to do this hard work of revitalizing forests, do watershed management, that's going to be local community jobs, municipalities, the partnerships. There are public-private partnerships that go into that work. And of course, there will be private jobs as well. So, I suspect, and Senator Bennett will illuminate on this further, but that amount of activity to do that necessary hard labor that we're talking about here is going to have a lot of job opportunities at all levels, from state level to the local municipalities, and of course local businesses within these communities as well.
I think that's right. And Bill, Conservation Corps certainly could be part of this, working on prescribed fire or strategic fuel breaks in coordination with local governments and state agencies, and then counties advancing wildfire mitigation projects like creating defensible space or reducing hazardous fuels in the wildland urban interface. You mentioned local contractors that they could be working removing invasive species like cheatgrass, or to restore habitat for sage-grouse and other wildlife. And it could also lead to new forest product businesses who might help with targeted thinning and make use of low-value timber in places like Colorado. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity to create high-paying jobs in rural parts of the Rocky Mountain West, including Colorado.
Thanks. It looks like Blair might have one more question. So Blair, if you want to unmute and turn on your video.
Yeah, sorry I skipped over anyone, but yeah, I was just kind of wondering what you guys are, obviously this is something that's palatable to probably a lot of people in the West. How do you get other representatives and senators on board with including this kind of thing in a package?
Jason, do you want to?
Sure. I mean, first of all, you just have to make the case and talk to people on an individual basis, right? I mean, these things never get done caucus to caucus, party to party. This is about relationships and making connections. And there's no surprise that the three of us that are on this are Westerners, right? We represent Western states and Western districts because we understand the need for this, right? Mike Simpson and others, as we continue to add co-sponsors on here, we live in these communities. We represent these states. We're going into another fire season. We talk to people that are concerned about their homes, their businesses, their ranches. We drink water that comes from watersheds that are degrading, that are not going to be palatable in a decade unless we actually do this management and clean up these watersheds that are feeding places like Denver. When somebody in Denver turns on their tap, that water is coming from a couple of 100 miles from a watershed in the mountains. And that watershed is getting worse and worse every year. So people that they're leading on this issue understand it in a very personal way. They're hearing it from their constituents. So that's our approach, is to talk to folks that have skin in the game here, who represent these places, and to develop support from there.
One of the things, Blair, about this bill, I think, is that it gets support from all over Colorado, because everybody, one way or another, is reliant on the watersheds, as Jason was just saying. So, our farmers and ranchers who are all downstream from these national forests and themselves can't fix the federal government's lack of attention to the national forest, desperately want us so they can preserve their farms and ranches and pass it along to their kids. Our communities all over the state who get their water from this, Denver being a perfect example, they need us to do this as well. And what we have to do is make other people understand that if you're downstream from any of these places, you're relying on it too. And that's a lot of America. And so I really mean it. The case that I make to people in the Senate is, you really need to think of these forests as infrastructure, just like you think of the New Jersey Turnpike as infrastructure, except that it's much more beautiful. I mean, it is that important to our economy, and it's really the lifeblood of the Western economy. Water is, and we've ignored these challenges to our forests for far too long. And I believe this administration understands it, and that's why they included it in their infrastructure proposal.
Great, thank you guys.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure we saw Mark's question from E&E News about defensible space fitting into this, and then more fire safe construction and the wildland urban interface.
Well, I mean, defensible space obviously fits into it, because it's, this is one of the reasons why a third of this money is not going to the federal agencies. A third of it is going to state and local communities who are now having to spend money that they don't have to deal with the kind of interfaces that you're talking about, and to protect their communities. But I think this is going to lead to more flexible cooperation among the federal government, state and local governments, municipalities, businesses, and people that are trying to create defensible space in a world where fire doesn't comprehend political jurisdictions. That's really one of the essential aspects of this bill. Is we know what it looks like on the landscape, and we know it's going to take collaboration from everybody to be able to solve the problems that we face. Jason?
Yeah, one of the things that we've learned over the last decade in Colorado from the mini fires, looking at the 2013 season, but also the most recent fire season last year that had some of our largest, most devastating fires in Colorado history, as well as the mini floods, is that planning matters. And having resources at the local level for resiliency planning and community engagement matters a lot. And that those communities that have been able to allocate resources to planning and resiliency and have these discussions fared much better than those that didn't. So by making targeted investments that really help at the local level, we expect that this is going to save a lot of money and a lot of pain on the back end by having those discussions and do more proactive planning on the front end.
Thanks. Our next question is from Himna Bustillo with Politico. Can you please unmute and turn on your video and ask your question? Thank you.
Yeah, hi, sorry, my camera is a little broken, so I can't do the video aspect of it. Thank you so much for holding this. I have kind of a twofer. So I was hoping you could reiterate a little bit what your plans are if this doesn't make it into the infrastructure package, and what priority provisions for the package could be when it comes down to negotiations, since we're looking at the possibility of split bills or a smaller package.
I missed the second part of your question. I'm sorry. There was coughing, which is usually my fault, but
No worries.
could you
No
repeat
worries. Yeah, the second part of that is what are priority provisions for the package when it comes down to negotiations? So if there's smaller package negotiated, or if the package is split up into multiple bills as it's kind of being discussed, what are like must-have items?
Well, I think I'm not going to negotiate against ourselves. I don't think I'm very pleased, as I said, that the bill was included, or at least a suggestion that well, they actually had the title of the bill in their proposal. The administration did. So I'm hopeful that this will be a way of building support for the infrastructure bill, including maybe bipartisan support for the infrastructure bill. And it's really great that this is a bipartisan bill in the House, and we're working to try to find some folks over on the Senate side. So if it doesn't pass in the infrastructure bill, we're going to have to find some other place to do it. And I look forward to working with my colleagues on the Agriculture Committee to try to figure that out on our side.
Okay, we have a second question from Bill with KOAA down in Colorado Springs. Bill, can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. We've gotten here, and we want to invest these billions of dollars from what some would say is antiquated forest management. Does this also include anything of looking at updating, modernizing, maybe fixing what's going on with our forest management, or does that need to happen separately? And does it need to happen, do you think, if we're going to spend this kind of money?
I'm happy to take a crack at it. I always think, we've got to, consider creating flexibilities in order to promote collaboration on the landscape. And I've been working on that for many years with Good Neighbor Authority and other sorts of things. I think we will see as the collaborations work, whether or not there are further changes that we have to make, but this bill isn't focused on that.
Okay, and our last question comes from John with Vale Daily. He said, will this provide more funding for clear cutting? Some nervousness in our community that fire mitigation equals clear cutting.
That is not our intention. It's for local communities to identify the solutions that work best for them. That's how you build resilience in the West. So this is not a top-down approach, and certainly does not mandate clear cutting.
Okay, I think that's all we have for today. Thanks, everyone.
Jason, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Really appreciate you.
Excited about this. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thrilled. Thank you. See you. Bye.
Goodbye.